I'd say a few things about the novel before I start. As a kid in the late 1950s and early 1960s, during the civil rights era, I lived in Alabama, which I later came to realize was an authoritarian police state at that point. And over the years, I tried to think of a way to capture what it felt like to be there at that time. And when I was working on my MFA, I came across a story about a reporter in Madison, Wisconsin, who was attacked by Joseph McCarthy as a kind of precursor to his witch hunt. And that sort of captured for me the feel, and eventually led to this novel, Estranged, which is about a city editor of the Capital News in a industrial Midwestern state called Watergate. So I'll just begin now, and I'll read for a few minutes and then turn it over to Jim, and he can read, and then we'll talk about what was involved in doing these novels. So it begins. Kid Guthrie, I'm sorry, Andrew Guthrie, my pint-sized young protege at the paper, and I went to the Memorial Auditorium for Larry McKnight's speech in November. It had been little less than a week since the senator flooded the state with his press release about the Capital News and the communists on its staff. Though he named no names, he meant me, of course, Randall Harker, Dell for short, the city editor who happened to be writing a series on the sorry-ass job McKnight was doing in Washington. I was mostly just chronicling his career, his disinclination to show up on the Senate floor even during important votes, his constant campaign financing irregularities, the bribes he all but bragged he took from special interest, that and his character, his two volatile marriages and quickie divorces, his immense fondness for distilled spirits. The senator struck back just as the Chinese invasion of Korea claimed the lead in the news. So forgive me if we took too little space to defend ourselves in print. But the publisher, John Tuckerman, a thin, stooped, aging gentleman socialist, he preferred the word progressive, who wore English tweeds under a swirling mane of white hair, flatly denied McKnight's vague allegations and a rare appearance on the editorial page. Nice of him, since it was his idea to attack McKnight in the first place. Old man Tuckerman, I have to hand it to him, warned me off the Memorial Auditorium. He said he didn't like my going. It was a kind of provocation. It might be dangerous. He meant it was dangerous for him, naturally. It was for him in the paper, not for me. He said the last thing we needed was for trouble to start with me there. When I told him it was my story and I was going regardless, he said if I went, he'd bust me off city desk. When I ignored him, he said to take the kid with the chin whiskers and a fast car. If anybody, he said, I mean anybody, points a finger at you or even looks at you too long, you hop in that car and better yet, have the kid outside at the wheel with the engine running. As he talked, he took out some matches and stoked his pipe. We can still pull this thing off, Dell, he said between smacks on the stem, if you don't do anything stupid. The Attorney General's investigating the senator's campaign finances, and the Republican leadership wants to bounce him in 52. The whole point is get McKnight for Pete's sake. Don't play to his hand. I shrugged and left for the meeting, the kid in tow. The Memorial Auditorium sat on the edge of downtown at the mouth of the north side. From there out, till you reached farm country, the neighborhoods grew swankier and swankier, the houses bigger and bigger, the country clubs more exclusive and grandiose. The worst of the Republican big money and the best of the progressive old money lay out there. Out there, they all drank cocktails together, played tennis together, golfed together, planned for the education of their children, and seduced each other's wives. The few friends my father once had in Capital City lived out there now too, but I never saw them. And neither did McKnight. Oh, there may have been a couple of lawyers from the north side there that evening who also happened to sit on the state Republican Central Committee, but most of the crowd came from the western suburbs and the south side, the Knights of Columbus and the Shriners, the small businessmen, a few Chamber of Commerce types, a real estate agent or two, and lots of women, lots of married women who joined the PTA and played bridge and canasta and had their hair done for the occasion. Tonight, they brought the children. The rest of the press was already there, and some of the boys got uneasy when the kid and I showed up. The Memorial Auditorium was a modern affair with a sweeping dome ceiling, concrete walls, and a blonde wood plank stage. Behind the podium, in sheep tile and pale washed out red, white, and blue, was a mosaic of the American flag. The place was filled, the atmosphere relaxed, like a high school talent show. I heard a steady buzz of neighborly conversation, the occasional squeal of tykes having too much fun, and the rare barks of discipline. The lights were up and people looked around in the glare to see who they knew. I knew McKnight mostly from photographs, the picked over glamour shots of newspaper copy, but I had seldom seen him in the flesh. I got that mild twinge I always get when I come across the abstract people I write about and all their corporeal splendor. Real bodies can sit, for example, on a metal folding chair and a row of folding chairs behind a podium and twitch and shift position and lean over trying to make strained conversations with persons left and right. McKnight wore a dark, conservatively cut, not especially expensive suit, a white shirt and a blue club tie. He sat with his legs crossed, one hand always resting on his top knee as he flopped legs back and forth between the older graying man, the geezer no doubt condemned to introduce him, and a younger, severely handsome, swarthy guy I took to be his aide, Daniel Slick Freeman. McKnight was shorter than I'd imagined, around 5'9". He had black, well-oiled hair, parted low on one side. The other comes straight back across the top of a bald spot. A string seemed permanently to dangle down on his forehead, dangerously close to the right eye, and he constantly pushed it back with his hand. He had a cowlick grease failed to conquer. And if I'd ever been tempted to buy a used car, McKnight would have been the man I expected to find standing across the hood for me. He saw us come in while he was talking to the older man, but he did not let on. When he finished what he had to say, we were already seated, and he turned to Freeman to point us out. But before he did, he took one long, hard look at me. His face was sardonic, and his eyes, if I'd been close enough to see his eyes, would hold the look of the huckster who has just spotted a newlywed walk onto the lot with his wife. His tongue flicked out across his lower lip, wetting it some more, and he smiled and spoke to the aide. Freeman's eyes, dark and luxurious, even at this distance, shot up immediately, involuntarily at us. The introductions consisted of mindless patriotism and half-baked eulogy. Some of us pledged allegiance to the pale flag, and the gray-haired geezer, president of the city's Chamber of Commerce, told a lot of silly jousting jokes, playing with McKnight's name. Finally, having spent what little dignity he possessed, the local joker gave broadcast commercial style a brief pitch for free enterprise and the American way. The lights, which had remained up during the introduction, went down when McKnight rose to speak. Under the concentrated illumination of the stage, I noticed for the first time McKnight's eyebrows. As he sat and talked casually to Freeman on the platform, they were unremarkable enough. But when he spoke to the crowd, they both arched dramatically, adding to the weasel-like sharpness at the center of his bloated face and to the satanic grin he deemed appropriate for his stance as a political crusader. Later, of course, his voice and manner of speaking would become famous. All good Americans would recognize the fast, blurred, almost monotonous tone and the long, rambling, illogical style that occasionally built to a kind of ersatz intensity before he made some wild, sensational charge. The national press would claim average folks found him exciting, but that night he was still a local phenomenon, a fast-talking, small-town businessman who had somehow been elected to public office. And the audience was bored. They were bored as he repeated the charges he had made in his week-old news release. They were bored during his dissertation on the evils of international communism. They were bored as he outlined the plot hatched by the Soviet stooges, the Red Chinese, to conquer the world, starting with Korea. Then he stopped his slurred monologue, and carefully poured himself a glass of water. I have here, he said, I have here in my hand a photographic copy, a photostatic copy of an editorial written by John Tuckerman, owner of the Capital News. The editorial is dated March 14, 1941. He pulled the paper down and held it out in front of his face as if he were straining to read it. And in that editorial, Mr. Tuckerman says, and I want to quote this to you, he says, now let's get down to cases. Mr. Harker, and by that he means Red Randall Harker, the same Red Randall Harker who now works for Mr. Tuckerman as his city editor. He says, Mr. Harker is a communist, and I defy him to publicly deny that statement. It was the same kind of crap he'd been tossing around for 10 minutes already, and I doubted very seriously that he had in hand anything but another page of the speech the polished young Freeman had written for him, or even that 5 people in our crowd knew what photostatic meant. But the difference was this: he had supplied a name, and now he had his audience. A breeze of hushes silenced the restless noise of the children. And let's get down to cases. Before I came here tonight, early this morning, in fact, I sent Mr. Tuckerman a wire. And in that wire, I told him, I said, Mr. Tuckerman, I have a question to ask you. Were you lying? The shout made most of us jump, and almost immediately 1 or 2 of the children started to cry. McKnight went on. Were you lying, I asked him, when you said Harker was Capital City's leading communist? If so, I said, tell us, please tell us, when he changed. And I did even more than that. I got down to cases. I went even further than he did in his editorial. I did not merely challenge him to publicly deny that he made that statement. No, I urged him that if a single word of what I say is not the truth, I urged him to sue me for libel, and I will gladly pay the damages. Yep, he's got us now, I thought, right in the wallet. I had been with Tuckerman all day, and no such wire had come for him. Still, McKnight had those of us in the audience now, in the moment, regardless of what I could disprove tomorrow. Let me quote something else to you, he said, frenetically searching through his notes. Since I was positive that whatever he was looking for did not exist, the search must have been an act. But it was convincing. Why would a man act out in confidence? Why would he openly reveal how unprepared he was? Let me quote something else, only this time, let me quote you something from a great American, J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI. I know Mr. Hoover personally, and he is extremely concerned about this case, extremely concerned about what is happening in communities like this all over this great country. Here it is, here it is. Again, he held a sheet of his speech out as if he were reading it. Mr. Hoover says, the primary aim of the Communist Party at the present moment and the United States is to plant party members in important newspapers and radio stations, especially in college towns. Now think about that. Did you know that in addition to Capital News, Mr. John Tuckerman owns controlling interest in your city's major radio station, KNET? I finished his thought for him, and the renowned and progressive University of Opsinicon was just down the street. Every person there could finish that thought for him now, or tonight at home, or tomorrow on the way to work. Yes, he had brought his bottled fear home for us. Now he went in for the kill. Now, I don't want to frighten anyone here tonight, he said. And when I tell you what I must tell you now, I want you all to remain seated, and I want you all to remain calm. But you read the newspapers, and you know what's been happening with labor unions in this state and around the country, the strikes, the violence, the threats. So I have to tell you this to protect myself. Let me say now that when the time comes that I quit exposing things because I might bleed a little in return, I promise you here tonight, I will resign from the United States Senate. There is someone here tonight, right here in this audience, who would do me great harm if he thought he could get away with it. Yes, out there among you, in the dark, maybe sitting right next to you, is a communist. The whispering and the sporadic whimpering and the hushings created a kind of tremor through the audience. You better go start the car, I whispered to Guthrie. Now, right, Chief, he said. Yes, he is here tonight. Let's have the lights up. Turn them up so we can see him. Yes, Red Randall Harker, the very man I've been talking about. The lights came on. If folks did not know where to look to find me, the boys in the press made it clear enough. And as the eyes of the crowd began to search me out, a reporter, no doubt on McKnight's payroll, made it final by pointing and shouting, "There he is." A couple of the women screamed out the way they used to on dates at a double feature horror show, and I remember worrying about how I was dressed. "I want that man searched," McKnight shouted. "I want him searched." The shock of light wore off and I could focus on the faces around me. I got a very, very unpleasant feeling in my gut. These people, these housewives and shopkeepers, seemed to suffer from paralysis, from the slowness of action you find in dreams. Or was it me who felt the leaden clamp of fear, the unreality of the moment? I should have known, I told myself. I should have figured it. If McKnight was getting to me, his effect on those who knew nothing about the dark alleys of real politics would be that much worse. I was surprised to find myself standing. I could not remember having stood. Then I saw the men hanging around the back entrances, moving down the aisle toward me. Oh, they would search me all right, and they would find on me, no doubt, one of the guns they now carried under their own coats. I looked at McKnight and said as calmly as I could, "I am a US citizen. Where is your badge?" He smiled sarcastically. He said, "Oh, so you are a US citizen. Okay, boys, better forget it. Let Citizen Harker hide behind his legal rights. He will not dare to try anything against me now. But Citizen Harker, before you go," I had already started to move awkwardly down the road toward the aisle. The crowd was buzzing now, and the people jerked their legs out from my path, but at least they were letting me pass. I stopped in the aisle and turned to face McKnight's ellipsis. "Since your boss, Mr. Tuckerman, does not like to answer inquiries," McKnight said, I'll ask you to do the same thing he asked you to do in 1941. Only I'll ask you to answer the question in the proper way, to answer the question Congress will put to you if we are ever fortunate enough to get you out there in Washington, D.C. on the witness stand. The question all communists refuse to answer. Are you now, or have you ever been, a member of the Communist Party? To this barrage, I responded, I am not a member of the Communist Party. That's not the question, he shouted as I walked out. That's not the question. The question is, were you a... Outside, I took a long breath and thought about the crowd. They had sat there frozen by that clown. Guthrie pulled up and I got in the car. Before he could ask what happened, I said, let's get out of here. Tuckerman's not going to like this. Okay, over to you, Jim.
Thanks, Charlie. Wow, I love hearing you read that. The voice is strong on the page, but it's stronger with your pipes added. So thanks for that. And Bob, thanks, Harrison County Public Library. Thank you. And
you're welcome.
We're glad to be here. Did I say that right, Bob? Harrison County?
No, it's Harrison Public Library.
Harrison Public
in
Library.
Harrison, in Westchester, New York. Harrison
Okay.
Public Library.
Harrison, sorry, I'm all the way on the other end of the state, so I've never
Yes.
actually been in Harrison. Hope to someday.
Yes, but we're very excited to have you. Thank you for joining us.
So just a little bit about my book. My book is Angela Sloan. Like Bob said, it's set during the Watergate era. What happened was, where the book came from, this is a few years ago. My daughter was 2. She was homesick with a cold one day. And so I spent the day with her. and I controlled the remote during that time of our lives. So we spent the whole day watching C-SPAN, and there was a panel discussion about presidential taping systems on C-SPAN that day. And I knew about Watergate. I'm 53 now, and I was a little kid when Watergate was going on and when Nixon resigned, but I just became re-interested in it and did a little reading and just wanted to know more and more. And never, to begin with, did not have any ideas about writing a novel. I just wanted to understand how could that, what is a democracy in which that kind of thing can happen? And I read this book, a great book called All the President's Men, Bernstein and Woodward. You may have seen the movie, and the book is terrific. It's full of odd people. And that got me onto the track of reading Watergate memoirs, of which there are many, many. Here's a couple by Howard Hunt. He was one of the current CIA at the time employees who organized the Watergate break-in. Total nut job. I read this book, which I'm reluctant to even handle now. Gordon Liddy was another one of the, I don't even like having that book on my hands. He was another one of the Watergate burglars. Anybody who was around then will remember John Dean, and the point gets to be the thing just spreads. John Dean wrote a best-selling memoir. John Dean's wife, Mo Dean, wrote her memoir of Watergate. She was famous because she sat behind him in the hearings. Her face became famous. Jeb Magruder was another one who worked in the White House in those days and was sort of roped into Watergate, wound up going to jail. His wife, Gail Magruder, wrote a Watergate memoir. And the theme of all these memoirs is, in one sentence, why it made sense at the time. And the thing spread. I'm just going to show you a couple more. It spread into memoirs. My reading spread to memoirs of the Weather Underground. These were the radicals, mostly college students and college dropouts from pretty fancy schools in the Northeast who started bombing ROTC buildings and stuff like that. Billy Ayers was underground for years and finally reemerged, became a professor in Chicago and published his memoir. Here's Susan Stern's book. She was with the Weather Underground, talks about how to build bombs and how to destroy monogamy, which was part of their program as well. This is a terrific book, not a memoir, but Thomas Powers is a journalist. And he wrote this book about Diana Oughton, who was with the Weather Underground. And she was building a bomb in the basement of a townhouse in Greenwich Village and blew herself up. So that's a true story. Her neighbor was Dustin Hoffman. So if you read the news stories of the day about this weird bombing in Greenwich Village, Dustin Hoffman is always kind of in the sidelines, because he was also out there in his bathrobe trying to figure out what the heck was going on. I also read a bunch of CIA memoirs from the time, and this is an interesting one by a guy named Larry Devlin, who was the chief of station for the CIA in the Congo in the early 60s. And he's the guy, Larry Devlin was the guy that got sent a packet of poison with the instructions to find a way to get it into the toothpaste of Patrice Lumumba, who was the first democratically elected president of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So that really happened. I mean, he didn't get the poison into Lumumba's toothpaste. We did not assassinate. The only reason we didn't assassinate Lumumba is because the Belgians did it first. None of those are novels. But they all, like I said, have this, to me, fascinating kind of agenda, which is a person trying to explain why this crazy thing they did made sense and was right at the time. But they're not novels, and I kind of attached myself to a couple novels that served me as models, aspirational models. You know Huckleberry Finn. The other thing about these two novels is they both have narrators who are 14 years old. So here's Huckleberry Finn with a terrific introduction by George Saunders. I recommend that edition. And this book, True Grit, sorry about the glossy cover there, True Grit by Charles Portis. The story of a 14-year-old girl who goes to avenge the death of her father. So my book, Angela Sloan, is narrated by Angela, and she's 14. And what happens is her father is with the CIA, and he gets mixed up in Watergate. So right after that falls apart, they have to go underground. And the other thing about Ray is he's what you might call an end-stage alcoholic. So she and Ray go underground, stuff happens, and then she reemerges and now has to answer for what they did. And the novel, right at the beginning of the novel, she's just been given a polygraph examination by an officer from the CIA who comes to her in disguise, and he administers the polygraph, which she fails. And then she sits down to write a letter to the CIA. And I'm just going to read the first, these are really short chapters, and I was going to read the first 3 chapters. It's only about 7 pages. So she talks about failing the polygraph exam, and then she talks some about how she and Ray got together. He's not actually her biological father, but he adopted her when he was working for the CIA in the Congo. And then in this last chapter, she talks about her childhood. Ray moved, after they left the Congo, they came back to the US, and Ray became an instructor at the farm, which is the CIA's secret spy college. And so Angela grew up on the farm, which is a real place. I think it's in Virginia, but you'll probably know about that. Virginia, yeah. Okay. In the swamps on the coast of Virginia, I've been told, but they don't actually explain that stuff. You have to kind of figure it out or know somebody. December 19th, 1972. Dear Central Intelligence Agency, your polygraph examiner, Mr. Jerry Wicker, has just now left my house. After questioning me for 2 hours in the voice of a sleepy robot, he has declared me unreliable and unnatural. He calls me a strange, dry girl. For 2 hours, I sat at the dining room table, wired to his aluminum suitcase, watching a brown felt sideburn curl away from his cheek. Glue failure. Now he accuses me of lying to him. My flat eye line and suspicious hand carriage have given the game away. Let me say this about lying. When a person is 14 years old and traveling on her own by car, she has got to have some stories in her pocket. Every trucker with a trimmer in his arm wants to know where that girl's dad is. Even the clerk at the Lehigh Motor Hotel feels he is owed a piece of her life story, if only so he can repeat it when someone comes asking. So yes, I got into the habit of making things up, but the truth was always real to me. I never lied to make myself feel better. Does somebody in Langley need to feel better? That is not a good reason to lie. Most people's fathers aren't perfect, and Ray Sloan is no exception. I don't expect you to defend him in the papers. I admit I didn't help matters any with my activities last summer when the FBI was looking for him. I was trying to lie low, but then I got involved in that other business with the terrorist hippies. The fiasco at the Watergate was a surprise to me. It was a thing that Ray had really almost nothing to do with. Still, I will tell you what little I know about it, plus everything about the Chinese communist girl known as Betty, or Ding. Please excuse my faulty typing. Having sat here these minutes beating this out, I have had the chance to remind myself that Mr. Wicker was only doing his job, perhaps to the best of his ability. I suppose he was following some important rule when he did not permit me to answer any of his questions beyond a yes or no. Thank you for your consideration in sending Mr. Wicker here, since driving to Langley for a lie detector test would have required me to miss a day of school. I have Mr. Wicker's rubber mole that he left on the edge of my sink. Now I am going to tell you what really happened, the whole thing, no stories. In order for it all to make sense, I will have to back up first. I will keep it as short as I can. Because of the truthful and explicit nature of what follows, please consider this a top secret correspondence. Chapter 2. There are some things I can't explain about Ray. Why did he drink too much? I don't know. Why did he save my life at a moment when his own life had exhausted him? He was not my father in the biological sense. Other people didn't know that because it was our cover. Even with friends inside the agency, there was no need to discuss such things. Why would there be? We didn't see a need anyway. It is easier to live your cover if you live it all the time, day and night, in public and in private, and even when you're alone. But I can remember my previous parents, of course, when they were murdered by the Simbas outside Stanley, along with my small brother and our Congolese housekeeper, Judith. I survived the massacre by hiding myself in an orange tree, where I still was clinging like a bat when Ray arrived in a yellow beer truck and spied me among the branches. He was someone who'd visited our place once or twice, an acquaintance of my father's. He plucked me down. N'ayez pas peur, he told me in his Oki-inflected French. Don't be scared. He walked all over the muddy yard with me, shaking in his arms. This was the summer of 1964, when the Simba rebellion was happening in the Congo. Many white people had left Stanleyville, and those who hadn't left were stuck. Simbas controlled the airport and had overrun the US consulate. The consular staff, including some agency men, were hostages. Ray worked under non-official cover, though, so he had no connection to the consulate. He was a manager with the Sheffield Beer Distributing Company. He hid me in a room at the Sheffield warehouse. The Simbas, as I recall them, were a frightening mob of orphans high on cannabis and beer. They dressed in animal skins, ladies' wigs, and secondhand military clothing, and they armed themselves with spears and stolen rifles. Their witch doctors worked a kind of magic that was said to transform bullets into water. Soon a pack of these sad killers searched the warehouse and found me. One of them had lipstick on his eyelids. Perhaps you can imagine my terror after what I had seen them do to my family. But Ray was there in an instant. He told them I was a drowned girl who had come back to life, and if any man touched me, his body would dry up like a husk. He sent the boys away with a truckload of Sheffield ale. I remember those weeks at the warehouse in pieces. There was cha-cha music on the radio in between the death sentences that were announced several times every day. Once I cut my hand while trying to open a can of sardines, and I shrieked my lungs out while Ray poured alcohol over the wound and wrapped it. Easy, Jumbo, he said. Another time I was sitting in the yard in some white sunlight when we heard trucks. Ray scooped me up off the ground and ran to put me inside. I felt both frightened and protected. In November 1964, Belgian paratroopers retook Stanleyville. The Simba retreat was chaotic and bloody. The government in Leopoldville, unable to rely on its own army, had sent a column of white mercenaries to rescue all the Europeans and put them on planes. A pair of these mercenaries came to the warehouse, and Ray lifted me into the back of their truck. There was a nun back there with her ankle taped up. I thought Ray was coming in after me, but then he didn't come in. I screamed when the truck pulled away without him. The nun began to sing Amazing Grace. I don't quite remember assaulting her, but evidently I did. She was bitten in places where she could not have bitten herself. I guess I did it. They turned the truck around. I jumped down from the truck and ran calling for Ray. There was an office in the warehouse, and that was where I found him, playing a record on his portable phonograph and holding a long, skinny pistol on his knee. He appeared confused to see me again. Hadn't he just sent me away? Something was happening inside him that was too quiet for a 7-year-old girl to understand. I had interrupted something, but I could not guess what. It didn't matter. I grabbed him, and this time I was not letting go. The men with the truck had followed me in. She will have to be hogtied, one of them had said. It's either that or leave her with you, the other one said to Ray, and then you will both have your livers eaten. I crawled up onto Ray's lap, sniveling into his neck, begging him to come with me. Whatever Ray's plan had been, whatever it was he'd intended to do when the record finished playing, he set it aside. He took 2 passports from a locked drawer of the desk, then he carried me to the truck. This time he climbed in with me. "I am sorry for my daughter's behavior," he said to the nun. I can never express the gratitude and love I felt then and continued to feel. "I have seen friends killed by children," the nun said, "but I hadn't expected to die at the hands of a white child." "Her name is Angela," Ray said, "and it has been my name ever since." Chapter 3. This is the last one, just about 3 pages. I was very lucky to have found Ray. Who else could have tolerated such a strange, dry girl with suspicious hand carriage and a flat eyeline? Maybe I was normal once, I wonder. Anyway, I clearly wasn't normal anymore. Bad things had happened. I had tasted none. I stuck to Ray like a strap. He was a solid man, 5'11.5", with a face that was creased and tanned because he never wore a hat. His hands were dark and somewhat knobby. He had an exceedingly normal hand carriage, calm and steady. The nails of the first fingers of his right hand were yellow from nicotine. His eyeline was straightforward. He could look at you for a long time without seeming to stare. He would just look at anything, watching. We never went back to Stanleyville. The Sheffield Beer Distributing Company went on with another agency man at the desk. Ray took me with him to Camp Peary, or the farm, where he became a highly valued instructor. I loved the farm. I attended boarding school in Williamsburg, but I would have stayed at the farm year-round if I could have, feeding the feral cats behind the cafeteria and observing the Venus flytraps in the swamp by the overflow parking lot. It was an excellent environment for me. I was considered by all to be Ray's daughter. I still had the old passport that Ray had brought from his desk at the warehouse, which described me as an American born in the Congo. The passport bore the photograph of a nondescript white baby. It must have occurred to me many times, I'm sure, to wonder who that baby was. Of course I wondered about her, but I never brought it up with Ray. Why delve into something like that? Breaks from school were spent at the farm, where I learned to keep out of the way. When I try, I'm pretty good at not being noticed. I can sit on the edge of a stool like a gargoyle for 1 hour, and people don't seem to notice me. It helps if you are a little bit homely. And yet I did manage to make a few friends at the farm. The women in the cafeteria will remember me, and Miss Evans let me use the library in return for helping her out with shelving books and so on. Not that she needed much help. She gets by very well with one arm. I passed long afternoons in a soft chair in her office, reading about the Berlin Tunnel, the Jedburgh teams who jumped from planes into occupied France, and many less famous exploits of the old OSS. History was my preferred subject, though I can read just about anything as long as it has a clear prose style and a basis in reality. For example, the novel Black Beauty by Anna Sewell has a wealth of information about horse care in it. That one was not a part of the farm library. Miss Evans brought it to me from her home shelf. In January of 1972, a distinguished career came to its end when Raymond W. Sloan retired from the Central Intelligence Agency. We said goodbye to the farm and to the town of Williamsburg, where I had ridden along with Ray on many surveillance and surveillance detection drills. We moved to DC and took a furnished rental on I Street in the Foggy Bottom neighborhood. The landlady was a widow named Adel. She lived next door. Often she would pop in with a dish of spaghetti or salmon croquettes, lingering to see us eat or to give me a lesson on the Chickering piano that took up most of the front room, along with an antique sofa that was covered in scratchy maroon velvet. At the window, there was a sprawling, long-trunked Diefenbachia plant. Those are some of the details of our life. I enrolled in public school and attended mostly. I can't say that I loved my 9th grade experience in Washington, DC. One day smoke came out of the ceiling and we all ran down the hall. That was one of the better days. Ray took long walks, and in homeroom I kept my sunflower knapsack on a counter by the window so that he would know which room I was in should he happen to pass. I saw him go by once or twice. Because of an old injury, Ray kicked his left leg a little high and to the side when he walked. You could notice it more from a distance than up close. Let me tell about Ray some more. He was a gentle-natured man who almost never raised his voice. I can only think of one time when he did that. He usually wore a permanent pressed shirt with a light blue windbreaker jacket tan poplin slacks, and hard shoes with a polish. He grew up in Oklahoma, and though he'd worked hard to have no accent, he still said measure instead of measure. I don't think he heard the difference. He passed on to me his values of toughness, stoicism, and keeping a low overhead. He also showed me something about the practice of a craft. In our new life in DC, one thing we both missed badly was the farm cafeteria. We ate at the People's Drugstore or a couple other places that had the kind of food we liked. At night, Ray settled in at the kitchen table. We kept the television there since Mrs. Adel forbade smoking in the room where her couch, piano, and draperies were. He'd have a drink while we watched the news together. And after that, after I went upstairs, he'd have many more drinks. I knew he drank too much. I never kept track of bottles, but I noticed he'd go through several trays of ice every night. Sometimes I'd hear him getting sick. However, the thing about too much is this: how much too much is too much? A person can eat too much every day of his life and still die old. Some people talk too much, yet never pay a price for it. Some people think too much. For Ray and me, I saw no reason why things could not go on as they were. Upstairs, I had a bedroom of my own. That was a welcome change from boarding school. It was quite a luxury to get up there and sit at my desk without a half dozen inquisitive girls on every side of me. I would read the Scarlet Letter or construct a polygon in my notebook using a compass and a straight edge. As much as I disliked ninth grade, I did my homework conscientiously, not wanting to screw things up and find myself back in boarding school. Ray needed me with him, and with him was where I wanted to stay. Right, thanks.
So that was
Should we
great.
start the Q&A now, guys?
Let's do the
Yeah,
Q&A.
let's
now.
do it.
Okay, I'm going to read the questions. The first one is from Rachel Morales. And Rachel, if you'd like to unmute yourself to expand on your question or follow up with the authors, you can do that. If you
There we go. Okay.
Okay. So Rachel's first question is, how many books have you guys written? And she also asked, what advice would you give a young aspiring author?
Okay, well, I assume that's the young aspiring author over there.
Go and hiding right here. Yes.
Well, I've probably written more books than Jim has, but fewer novels. I've written probably 2 or 3 dozen books, but I've written only 1 novel and 1 collection of short stories.
Oh.
And Jim's got several. He's got 3 novels under his belt, I think. All of them, by the way, just great.
Hey, thanks, man. Let me,
And so, what advice would we give to an aspiring young?
Where'd Jim go?
Oh, he's done.
I'm looking for your other book.
Oh.
It's downstairs.
The advice I would give to aspiring writer, is keep at it. Keep at it.
Keep at it.
That's the thing. From
So,
that
there's a-
time you get a book published, everybody you meet's gonna discourage you from doing it in one way or another, and you just keep at it.
Keep doing it. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add that I used to tell everybody what I did, but I think everybody's different. And for some people, the trick is to just get up every morning and write for an hour, no matter what. For other people wait till they have 2 weeks and get inspired, and I don't know, but got to find a way to not let it turn into homework. Find a way to find a way to do it in which you love it.
That's absolutely true. If you enjoy it, you'll do.
Okay, are we ready to move on?
Sure.
Okay, this question is from Jeremy Saucier. I'm not sure if I pronounced your name correctly, but if you'd like to unmute yourself, Jeremy, to expand on your question or follow up. His question is, could you talk more about the kind of research and preparation did you undertake to help you capture the time period you've written about? How much is based on lived experience and memory versus written history or other sources? And I assume this is to both of you.
Okay, you want to go first?
For me, it was two things. I got a whole bookcase here full of memoirs of the time, and I found a lot of I got a lot of help from not necessarily reading the best books about Watergate, but some of the worst books about Watergate, because what I get, because I was reading not just for the events, but for Voice and for the ticks that people were, the mistakes that people have made in the ways that they think about their lives and their experience. But then for me, the part that did come from lived experience is stuff like, what it's like to sit in the back seat of a Plymouth Scamp for 12 hours. I remember that. And what it's like to, back when Sears, you could go into a Sears and Roebuck store and buy a dress, a record album, a guitar, and a bicycle and a framed picture for your living room wall, and an impact drill. Those days are gone, but some of the texture of life, I remember vividly from those days. So that's firsthand.
Okay, so for me, I was looking for a way to express the kind of oppressiveness of a police state, of a government aimed at hurting its citizens. That comes from the civil rights in Alabama when I was a kid. And I was working for the Iowa Historical Society, and I came across an article about a Madison, Wisconsin reporter named Cecil Parker. And Joseph McCarthy had used this reporter as a test case for his witch hunt. He tried it out first to see if it would work. And when it worked, then he launched it nationally. Cecil Parker, by the way, continued to write for the Madison Times or whatever the newspaper was. And he was one of the talking heads in the movie Reds. I don't know if any of you remember the movie Reds, but it was from the 80s about a prominent American communist. And they would have people who knew him talk in between the scenes and stuff. And Cecil Parker was one of those. So
John Reed.
Yeah, John Reed was who the movie was about. My wife is helping me out here while we do all this, in case I'm getting old, I forget things. And so that somehow that clicked like that, and I thought, well, I can capture what it's like to live in an oppressive political society with this story. And from there, I just started reading. I read everything I could about McCarthy. Everything I could about the Times. I dug into in the collection at the Iowa Historical Society. I even got in touch with the Wisconsin Historical Society and got them to send me some materials. And then 20 years later, I was ready to write the novel. So that's how these things go. The other thing was about lived experience. It captured a lot of I tell you what it captured for me. One of the things I was able to use personally to push the story was what it was like to be in graduate school and have everybody be conscious of everything that you were doing. That was an important inspiration for me. And for the McCarthy, Jim asked me this question once before. There's a scene in the novel where Red Randall Harker meets McKnight personally, and McKnight turns out to be this kind of pitiful, really human drunk who really doesn't know what he's doing, and he's being run by his aide. But he's still this powerful personality in that scene. And for that, I was trying to get what a historical character was really like in real life. And I used a friend of mine who was a narcissist like McKnight, and by the way, like Donald Trump, to animate this guy's character. So McKnight lives on the page for me as a kind of fond portrait of this now long dead teacher that I had for many years. So I think fiction probably helps us deal with our own grief in a lot of ways as well. So.
Okay, we
It's
have a
interesting.
question. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I'm just going to say it's interesting when sometimes the cool moments happen in a novel or in writing when you kind of get off program, like because McKnight is such a just really repugnant figure in the novel that I have nothing but disapproval. One part of my brain has nothing but disapproval for him, but then yeah, in that scene you're talking about, we sort of veer into, whoa, like this is a human, and I could actually feel compassion for him in some way, and that gets super complicated and icky and really interesting.
Yeah, that was that was one of the things I expressly wanted to do in the novel. We talked about this before too,
Yeah.
is make a historical character real, and you have to find some way to connect with him, and that was by exploiting my dead friend, I guess.
Yeah.
The way you get to do it.
Can I jump in? I'm Linda.
Sure.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm having trouble getting on the chat line.
Okay, go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, maybe it's the computer thing. Charlie, how do you define your humor? The wild rhetoric just flows into a weird, serious comedy like out there among you is a communist. There he is, screams like a horror film reaction, etc.
Well, it's a kind of my humor. Linda, I think it's a grim irony is what it comes down to. That's most of the scenes are structured on some kind of irony, and sometimes it's frightening, and sometimes it's light, but it's I don't know about you, but I wanted every scene in the novel to have some kind of ironic or humorous or release from this oppressiveness of the atmosphere. That's the best way I can put it. It seemed to me that if somebody's going to read this novel and enjoy it, they're going to have some kind of grim humor escape that gets them through the scene by scene.
Thanks.
Okay, we have another question in the chat from James Logan. Mr. Phillips did a great job of conveying the tyranny and mob mentality of the McCarthy era. Question is if the Freeman character has any relation to Roy Cohn. And also, who do you consider the biggest stylistic writers on your own writing? I think what they mean there is, influence on your writing. And James, if you want to unmute yourself and weigh in or follow up, please do.
No, you stated it just clearly. You couldn't see me if you wanted to. I'm out in the dark right now, but I'll be glad to sit back and listen.
Okay, thanks, James.
All right, now let's see. All right. As far as influence, geez, there's so there's so many of them. I couldn't start. I tell you one that would be surprising for this novel, I think, is Thomas Mann. One of the writers that inspired me to do this was Thomas Mann and his novel Magic Mountain. I thought if there's a way I could do a Magic Mountain of the 1950s that had the kind of relationship to American culture that Magic Mountain had to the Weimar culture, that would be a great thing. So that's one there. Then you've got Robert Penn Warren, and you've got Raymond Chandler, all the tough guy novelists, Dashiell Hammett. They were important. Now I've forgotten what the other part of the question was.
Connected to Jim's novel.
The other
Oh.
part was about whether the Freeman character had any relation to Roy Cohn.
Oh yeah. Oh yes, he did. This is an interesting thing. I mean, I hate, like Jim said, I hate Roy Cohn. I think he's an evil character. And so I made Freeman look as physically like him as I could. But I got to thinking, okay, no, I'm not even thinking. As I was working on it, and I had this whole kind of underground homosexual thing running through the novel, I got to where I found myself presenting him sympathetically in the scene. He comes out saying, well, maybe by the time this whole thing is over, it won't matter if I'm gay or not. And in a way, it's surprising. It's surprising. I've been trying to work that theme positively for another character, but not for the Roy Cohn based character. And voila, I guess you got sympathy for one person. This pops up with
Yeah, well, I think it's kind of, you wouldn't have that sympathy back in the 50s or 60s. It's certainly an evolution we've gone through, but it would be hard to see him sympathetically for me. I think he's like the 20th century Gollum or something.
Yes. And again, I think it's a strength that there's some measure of identification with him in that scene. Although maybe you don't feel it yet. Anyway, it's a great question. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it, and great listening to both of you. Thank you, Jim. I'll be glad to get out and get one of your books now.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate that. James, right?
Yeah, James Logan.
Thanks, James.
Thank you. I appreciate it both. I'm done.
Okay,
Go to.
Pardon me, go
on to
ahead. Did you want to say something else, James?
No, I was saying on to someone smarter and more relevant than I am.
Yeah.
That's the end of the questions in the chat. Maybe we can open it up if anybody wants to unmute themselves and just throw out a question. We have about half an hour left.
All right.
Okay,
I have a question.
sure.
How do we get the recording to this so we can just listen to the,
Yeah, that's a good question. You go to the Harrison Public Library website, which is harrisonpl.org. And then if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see links to YouTube, Instagram, etc. And if you click on YouTube, the video will be there, along with other videos of other events we've had. Give us a couple days, maybe a week, to when we have to do some editing before we post it on the site. Okay.
oh, thank you.
Sure.
All right, well, I have a question for Jim. And I noticed, Jim, this time when you were reading, I've probably read Angela Sloan a lot lately, but the notion of how central the notion of just what is the truth popped up to me in this reading, and I know that's a theme in Estranged. I keep coming back to it over and over again, and I'm just wondering if the idea of what's the truth, the search for truth, is not inherent in a historical kind of book. And if that's one reason you're drawn to place a novel in a historical context, is to raise the kind of search for truth.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that is it's a compelling question to me. And like I said, to start with, when I became reinterested in Watergate, I just wanted to know what happened. But then you get to reading, and there is no objective account. Every story you hear is, here's what I'd like you to know about it, or here's what so there's in one way, the narrative is, here's what I want you to hear. But in another way, there's another thing going on behind the narrative sometimes, which is, here's what I want to believe about myself. So for example, if you were Jeb Magruder,
Right.
this guy, and you're a young father, you felt great because you got a job in the White House, and now you're raking in $30,000 a year. It's 1971. You got a bunch of kids, a pretty wife, and then you realize, you cut a corner, and now you're kind of shading the truth a little bit. And next thing you know, you're in prison, and you can't see your wife or your kids except maybe once a month. What do you have to say for yourself, and how do you live with yourself? And it kind of comes out between the lines. And in Angela's case, I think the big thing that she never does quite confront is, your father loved you, but he drank himself to death. So did he really? How do those things go together? If he loved you, why did he drink himself to death? He didn't have to do that. And she doesn't come out and say that in the book, but I think of that as kind of a motivating, or it's in pushing her version forward as she tries to evade that question.
Well,
It's not in the front of my mind, but it's kind of in the back of my mind as I'm writing it.
Be the case that a worry with truth when you have characters from the CIA. I mean, that's the whole theme of any almost CIA novel, is that. And also, by the way, with real CIA people too, it becomes a problem. But I mean, Harker does the same thing in my novel. He gets ticked off at people when they try to make decisions not based on the truth, because he's being attacked by a lie, and they're responding with lies, and he keeps trying to hold on to a center. And at the time, I thought of that as just a personal obsession of mine. but now that we're in post-Trump America, it seems to be obsession for a lot more people than we thought. And history doesn't repeat itself, we hear, but it sure does echo, I think.
Yeah, I wondered when you're reading that opening chapter and the way that McKnight singles out Harker in the crowd and makes a show of this confrontation. It reminded me of moments that I watched on TV where, let's say, Donald Trump in a campaign speech, points to somebody in the back, yeah, rough him up. I mean, I even wondered if you were thinking of those kinds of events when you were writing.
When I wrote that scene the first time, Trump was still a rich playboy in New York.
Okay.
But oddly enough, when as the book was coming out and Trump with Trump's speeches, I kept when I would proofread it, I would hear, Trump started appearing in my novel. I thought, oh my God, this, he's everywhere. But that may be, that may be an attribute of populist politicians. I mean, do that. Although we've never seen anything like that as clearly as we did with Trump. But I do think McCarthy in a couple of his speeches also pointed out people in the crowd, turning anger. It's using politics to focus and fear to focus on a single individual. But how aware? That's enough. Okay, that brings me back to the CIA stuff. And were you? One of the great things about Sloan is that he drinks himself to death. I mean, I don't mean it's a great thing, but one of the interesting things is that he drinks himself to death. And I married into a CIA family. I told you this when in my first marriage. And the one thing I noticed about all of them is just how much they drank. I mean, it was everyone in the CIA seemed to be afloat in liquor at that point. And I wonder if you were aware of that when you created Sloan, if that came out of the, what did people notice that in the research?
I think I picked that up in some proportion of the memoirs that I read about CIA life, in the 60s and 70s. Though I don't know too. Some of it may be just a difference in the way people talk about alcohol. And I don't know, used alcohol, and I know that it's also something I would have been thinking about anyway. I mean, if I'd been writing a novel that didn't involve a CIA officer, it still would have involved
the reporters
father, I think. But
it's just when I read the depiction of Sloan, he just reminded me so much of a couple of the characters from the CIA I knew via the family into which I married, and I just thought, I wonder how he picked that up.
well, I wish I'd been able to ask you about that when I was working on this book, because I didn't know you then. And yeah, I did meet one. I at that time, if you went to the CIA website, there was somewhere in there I was digging around and I found a link to like public entertainment liaison or something like that. And I clicked on that link and emailed it, and somebody wrote me back. And his name was Larry something. And I said, I'm writing a novel, blah, 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 try to make it sound as legitimate as I could. And he said, okay, I will meet you at this date, this time, and at the CIA headquarters, and I'll talk to you for an hour. And I did that. And the the first thing that struck me about it is that it's really a lot like a university campus. Like you go in the parking, you go to the parking booth and you get your hang tag and you walk through the security gate. And then once I was in, he let me in, there's a coffee shop and there's a library and there's a bunch of people, you know, reading books while they ate their lunch. And then later I thought, if I ever publish this book, I'm going to send him a copy. And so I did, and I tried to find him and he disappeared. No link. I Googled his name. He's vanished from, there's no record of Larry. I had his last name. Yeah, he's gone.
You probably could.
I can't even prove that happened.
Jeez. Well, I mean, certainly the reporters that I knew in Washington drank a lot as well. So maybe it's not merely the CIA. Maybe it's anyone in search of truth needs liquor here or somewhere. How aware of you were? What am I trying to say? The genre in which you were working. There's a lot of elements of picaresque, of adventure tales and just travel stuff in the novel. Were you aware you were playing around with generic?
I think that it wasn't deliberate, but I think I read and have loved so many books that are sort of along those lines. It is just a way that I think of, I don't think I've written a novel that wasn't a road book in some way, or just a way of, some people write family sagas that go over many generations, and I just seem to think that way. Maybe this is a connection. Your book, it's about, in some way it's about the McCarthy era, in some way it's about journalism, but another way its mode is a lot like you said, a Dashiell Hammett novel or a hard-boiled detective novel, or here's one. Check that out.
Oh yeah, The Big Sleep.
Yeah, Red Randall reminds me a lot of Philip Marlowe in his voice, just in his voice and the way he talks about people, and he quickly sizes them up, and constant cynicism with this kind of tenderness that he keeps buried way back.
That came from, that's the way when I made the decision to set it in 1950, that's the way 1950 sounded to me. I mean, that's the, all the movies and all the, so it was kind of Raymond Chandler-esque, and coming to read those novels, Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and that, was also inspired me to write this. I mean, it was like, you're looking for the thing that will help you connect things together, and that, and that did it. I didn't want it to be a tough guy novel in the sense of a murder mystery. I didn't want it to be that generic, but I did want it to sound like, a Raymond Chandler character telling a story, kind of. But
I wonder if anybody else in the room is working on a novel right now.
that's a good question.
That's when most people go, what? Not me.
I just heard an interview today with Howard Jacobson, the British novelist. And he said, I'll try to see if I can do justice to what he said. He said that the way I understood him, when he starts writing, some kind of creativity sort of starts to happen that he couldn't quite have anticipated. And, it's sort of like you sometimes hear authors say the book started writing itself. But what I thought was interesting is he said, everybody should engage in some creative pursuit to take advantage of that thing that happens. I mean, would you guys agree with that?
The demon takes over. At some point, the demon, when you're doing something creative, the demon comes and grabs you and takes you for the ride out into the, out into the stratosphere. And there's, you're just hanging on. You're just hanging on at that point. And that's when you know, I think, you're going to get the thing done. It's not exactly that it begins to write itself, but I've heard people describe it that way.
We have another question in the chat from Rachel Morales.
Okay.
Young minds want to know, what is the difference between a novel and just a book? And if you want to unmute yourself, Rachel, and weigh in or follow up.
Okay. Well, for one, I don't know about Jim, but a novel is a made-up story. It's not tied to reality necessarily. I mean, it reflects reality, and it has to be real, and it has to be viable and all that stuff. But it's a made-up story. It's something that never happened, that seems to have happened. I don't know, Jim, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you that it's made up, but it's also a way of thinking about the world you're in. I mean, yeah, it's a way of thinking about, it's fiction, but it's a way of thinking about your life and your real world, and about what it's like to be a person. And humans are social creatures. None of us, you can't be born and go off on your own immediately. So it's a problem, being a human with social, with need for love, need to love, that's complicated. One difference between a novel and a work of fiction and a work of nonfiction is that there's always an important moment in a work of nonfiction where the writer has to say, and then we don't know what happened. Like, we don't really know what he was thinking in the last moments of his life. But in a novel, like, think about that story by, Tolstoy,
Right.
The Death of Ivan Ilyich. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but the whole story, long story, and we're with this man in the last moments of his life. And you can't do that in nonfiction.
There's a modern novel called Stoner that's exactly like that. It's about a writer, in fact, who writes it. But you're with that guy as he dies, and you know what it's like, as best as we can know what it's like to die, because he dies right there with you in his head, and that's another thing that a novel is. It's a way of thinking about life that you couldn't think about otherwise. It's a way of answering questions, or even asking questions, trying to see the truth of things that you can't get otherwise. I mean, I guess it's not a substitute for religion, but it has some of the same kind of rewards that faith and religion have, I would think.
So a quick question. So can a novel be in any genre? Like, it could be in sci-fi or fantasy or just...
Absolutely.
Okay.
In fact, some of the best novels sci-fi, but no, yeah, absolutely in any genre. Jim and I write literary novels. All that means is they don't sell as well as science fiction. So
Can I try again with Jim, a question? This is Linda.
Sure.
I'm not sure that this is going to become a question. The reaction is, at the end of what you read, when you repeated the too much and that whole concept of kind of, you've already spoken a little bit about it, but how do you know? And you're going toward it, and it's kind of related to what you all are talking about, dying and death. But you had like 3 times you said, of different examples of like drank too much and something too much and something too much. And I wondered if you took that concept, and with Angela in her life too, there were moments where she came up upon that kind of inquiry, like, am I close to the too much? Have I gone beyond it? I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, just what you said is exactly right. I think that's what she's doing there. Yep.
What makes her real? And as a teenage girl, she just, Jesus, that's a good point, Linda. That's exactly what makes her such a fetching character, I think.
Yeah, thanks for saying that, Linda. I think she's well, it's kind of weird. It was weird writing that book because I'm not a 14-year-old girl. And, like in my situation in life, I have much more common with Ray than with his daughter. And as I said, when the novel sort of took shape in my brain, part of my main job in life was looking after my daughter, the daughter that my wife and I were looking after together. So yeah, there's something something was weird. Weird was going on there as I was trying to imagine how she would think about her father and herself.
We need to start wrapping up. There's another comment. It's not a question. I'm going to read this comment, and then I need to say a few things before we wrap up. But this was really, really interesting. Thank you guys for doing this. It was so interesting. I'm going to watch the video because I was a little distracted watching questions and everything. So I'm going to watch it later so I can really listen more attentively. But this is a comment from James Logan. One of the great novels regarding the last moments in a character's life, and one of the greatest last lines in a novel can be found in Jack London's novel Martin Eden. Just a recommendation. Now I just want to mention that Charles Lamar Phillips also wrote Dead South Stories, and his fiction appears in Massachusetts Review, New England Review, Cincinnati Review, Fifth Wednesday Journal, Chaffin Journal, Raritan, and others. He's a graduate of the Ohio Writers Workshop, and he's been a writer, columnist, or editor at Congressional Quarterly, The Washington Star, Higher Education and National Affairs, History News, and American History. He is now managing editor of the American Journal of Play. He resides with his wife, Patricia Hogan, in Rochester, New York. James Whorton Jr. is the author of 2 other novels, Approximately Heaven and Frankland. A former Mississippian and former Tennessean, he lives in Rochester, New York with his wife and their daughter, and he's an associate professor of writing and literature at SUNY Brockport. I also wanted to mention that we have an annual Meet the Author event coming up on October 23rd. If you go to our website and go to the events page and click on that date, October 23rd, you'll see all the authors who are going to be there. And just briefly, we're going to have Ronald Balson, David Gessner, Roselle Lim, Gloria Goodreich, Sam Keene, Mia P. Manansala, Tom Lynn, Karen White, Jennifer Ryan, Juliet Fay, and Madeline Miller. So we hope you can join us for that. And we've got a couple more minutes. If you guys want to add any closing thoughts or anything.
I have to say, It was the Iowa Writers Workshop, not the Ohio Writers Workshop. The Iowa.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I thought I said Iowa. Sorry.
I don't correct that, but that's it.
James, thanks for that recommendation. I've not read Martin Eden, but I'll look that up.
It's terrific. I just read it a couple of months ago. It's got a really great overarching philosophy underneath it, unlike any of the other Jack London novels, I think, but it's up there. Really good.
He's surprisingly good, isn't he, James? I think. Yeah.
Oh yeah, outstanding.
I mean, his reputation is kind of coming back, but it was obliterated for a while. I think he's much better than people think he is.
I agree. I don't know if you've read that novel or if it's been a while, but
Yeah,
I was really impressed by it.
yeah, it is great.
And Jim, I'd like to say, I know that since I haven't read your book, I can't say stylistically, but there's some of the, when you were reading, there's something reminiscent to me of just some Graham Greene in there. I don't know if are you a Graham Greene fan?
Yeah, I like Graham Greene a lot. I've got some of his books standing here next to me. Yeah, I'm kind of scared of Graham Greene. Did you ever read his memoir?
No, I haven't.
That thing scared the daylights out of me. And I was scared to read any more of his books.
Why?
But I love like The Quiet American.
Right.
And yeah, I love his books.
What was it about his memoir?
Well, okay, I'll tell you one of the less terrifying scenes is when he's, I guess he suffered from what we would call depression as a young man, but in a time when the clinical diagnosis was not available and the same treatments were not available, but he describes feeling so depressed and numb that he goes to the dentist and has a healthy tooth pulled. Just to sort of feel something, he says. This is not a novel. This is Graham Greene claiming that he actually did this himself.
Greenland. He lives in a world called Greenland, which is such a strange. Yeah, I agree. He's a scary guy,
But a good writer.
Yeah.
An amazing
I'll
writer.
come back to him one of these days. Yeah, I like his novels.
Thanks again. I'll butt out.
Okay, I guess we're going to wrap it up then. Thank you to everyone who came. Thanks especially to our two authors. This was really fascinating.
Thanks.
And thanks again, and have a good night, everybody.
Yeah, thanks
Thank
y'all.
you,
Thanks,
guys.
Bob.
Bye, Robert.
Yeah.
Bye.
It's good to see
Bye.
you.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.